Okay. Thank you for coming back for more of CORT 2023. Queer and trans somatic psychotherapist Mahrs Schoppman is our next speaker. I had the pleasure of meeting Mahrs in person last year, and his caring demeanor and expertise made a significant impression on me. In this session, Mahrs will be talking with us about religious trauma and queer embodiment. Welcome, Mahrs. It's great to see you again.
Thank you so much, Janice. It's so wonderful to be here. So wonderful to be a part of this incredible event that you created. Um, yeah, I just want to start by acknowledging you for hosting this event, and also to everybody else in this field who's laid a foundation for religious trauma. Um, I remember about 15 to 20 years ago when I was deconstructing and looking up religious trauma, and there really wasn't very much information out at the time, and now there is so much. So I have to acknowledge those who have been paving this foundation for us to be here, and for people to be able to get more information about this really important topic. So I'm thrilled to be here. Like Janice said, my name is Mahrs. I'm a queer and trans somatic psychotherapist. I'm going to be talking about um, how religion, dogmatic religion in particular, has impacted queer bodies, as well as non-queer bodies and straight bodies, in terms of the dogma against queerness. And so I first just want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you um, in this work with a broken heart. In this work, I feel like I have to sort of maintain a broken heart, and want to invite you to let your heart feel the topics today, to feel the ways that queer bodies have been really, really deeply harmed by um, religious dogma. For queer folks who have been persecuted, targeted, and attacked in the name of an ancient book and an invisible entity, for what queer people have to do in order to seek connection, belonging, safety, and dignity. The two questions I'm going to be really centering today. These are two questions that in the last months, as I've been preparing for this, have really just been sitting with and thinking about and talking with people about. And I will share these questions, and I just want to invite you to let yourself feel these questions in your own body, to feel into some of the answers to these questions for you if you are somebody who was raised within religious dogma. The first question is, what does a queer body need to do in order to survive a social context of religious dogma that seeks to eradicate queerness? I'll say it one more time. What does a queer body need to do in order to survive a social context of religious trauma that seeks to eradicate queerness? The second question is, what is a non-queer body or a straight body within religious dogma need to do in order to cut off the natural flow of love towards queer bodies? One more time. What does a straight body within religious dogma need to do in order to cut off the natural flow of love towards queer bodies? And so as we move forward with this, we first need to acknowledge the queer folks who actually did not survive. We'll be talking about survival mechanisms and what queer bodies have to do to survive religious contexts. And yet there are so many queer folks who have not survived the impacts of religious trauma, who died because their existence was a direct threat to the religious dogma that seeks to eradicate personal expression and freedom in exchange for terror, control, and conformity. For these people, my heart breaks. My heart breaks for queer folks around the world who are not yet safe enough to come out. My heart breaks for straight folks who've had to cut parts of themselves off, to contort reality, to warp their vision, to transform beauty into threat. My heart breaks for parents who were convinced that rejecting their queer child or family member is morally superior to loving them. My heart breaks for queer bodies who every day have to question their existence, their value, and their worth in this world. What I want to be central to what we're talking about today, the most important thing I want to say today is that queerness is beautiful. And religious dogma that says anything to the contrary is profoundly and dangerously wrong. Queerness is an essential part of the antidote to the harm of religion. Queerness is medicine for all. As a somatic psychotherapist, throughout my talk today, I'm going to pause and invite you to notice your body. To notice your body in the time and space in which you exist. To notice the sensations of your body as you hear me say, queerness is beautiful. And I invite you to take a moment to thank your body for what you had to do to get here to this moment. To thank your body for what you had to do to survive, to maintain connection and belonging. So I'd like to share a brief piece of my own personal story. I'm a queer and trans man who was raised within a fundamentalist Christian environment. I went to a fundamentalist Christian school from kindergarten throughout my undergrad and college. I was a devout Christian child. I was the kid who carried my Bible with me everywhere I went and prayed for every possibility to tell strangers about Jesus, whether it was the airplane or while I was getting my haircut, telling my neighbors, evangelizing to my own family members. I laid awake at night in terror about all of the people who I could not reach or who would not believe me. The people who I believed to the core of me, I was responsible for their eternity. I dedicated my life to the dogma of Christianity. It's all I wanted to do. It created a sense of containment for me in a home that was chaotic. It gave me purpose, it gave me meaning, it gave me passion. I was deep in it. A week after my 18th birthday, my mom came out to me as a lesbian. She shared that she had been a part of Exodus International, which, if you're not familiar, is no longer exists, but was the largest national organization that sought to help people eradicate queerness from their body, help queer people become straight, pray the gay away kind of thing. There's an amazing documentary on Netflix called Pray Away about Exodus and the reasons why it no longer exists that I highly recommend. My mom was a part of Exodus for years and years and years throughout my childhood. When she came out to me, I found out that the Bible study that was hosted in my living room as a child was an ex-gay prayer meeting. When she told me, I'm sad to say, I was deeply, deeply ashamed of her. I told her it was not okay. And I encouraged her to continue her pursuits of trying to, quote unquote, heal from this very beautiful part of her, to work hard to eradicate the beauty of her essence. And she did. She kept at it for years. Lo and behold, it did not work. The only thing it worked to do was to create deep, deep harm in her body, in her psyche, and in her sense of self. After she came out to me, I didn't tell a soul. I locked it away in the chambers of my shame. I didn't dare tell anybody. It was, how did I say this? One of the worst days of my life when she told me. Because of what I was taught about homosexuality, taught that it was unforgivable, that it was an abomination, taught that queer people were dangerous. Um, I was told, my mother told my youth pastor, so I would have some to talk to. He pulled me aside and told me I needed to move out of my house because it was now a dangerous place for me to live. I carried that with me for so long, and I had to cut of my love for my mom off and say, I can love this part of you, but not this part of you. Luckily, when I was in college, I went to Azusa Pacific University. I had an incredible opportunity to see a presentation that was done by an organization called Soul Force, who came to my Christian campus via the Equality Ride, which was fashioned after the Freedom Rides, and it was a group of people who drove a bus around to different college campuses that had rules against people practicing homosexuality. Schools that allowed them onto campus, they did a presentation of the history of violence, of people using the Bible for violence. And they did it, they talked about how God loves and affirms people of all sexual identities. I heard a man named Jacob Breton say those words, that God loves and affirms people of all sexual identities. And instantly, I don't know why, but instantly I believed him, even though it was contrary to everything that I'd ever been taught. Every single cell in my body believed him. It took a while for my brain to catch up and for me to make sense of, but the Bible, this is what it says. Eventually, it did catch up, but every single cell in my body believed him. The next day, I drove 6 hours home to Sacramento and I told my mom she was okay. Miraculously, she believed me too. She believed me, and watching her life move forward from that moment was all the evidence I needed. It was like someone turned the lights back on in her body. I saw her come back to life. It wasn't too long after that that I realized I myself was queer. And I found myself in love and in a same sex relationship. At the time, I was positioned to be have a full time ministry position at a mega church high school youth group. It was my dream job. It was everything that I ever wanted as a small child, to dedicate my life to the ministry. When I went and told them that I was queer, they affirmed what I already knew, that I couldn't work at that church any longer. The man who was to be my boss cried out of confusion, saying he didn't understand. He had seen God work through me, and this couldn't be possible. After that, I lost so much. I lost my church, as well as my job, my community, my sense of dignity, purpose, and belonging, and eventually my faith. It was awful. It was truly, truly awful. It was a death in many ways that led to a rebirth. The truth is, I like to think of it as my true time of being born again. I tell this story because I am somebody who has been on both sides. I have condemned my mother's queerness, and my queerness has been condemned by many whom I have lost. Religion is terrified of queerness, and truthfully, with good reason. Queerness is a threat towards dogma. Before I move on, I just want to take another moment to invite you to feel your body. just to notice how you're doing. If it's helpful or useful to give a name to how you might be feeling, your mood or a sensation or an impulse you might have. Just taking a moment to notice how you're orienting to these words. Right. Let's talk about how queerness is a threat to dogmatic religion. This is one of my favorite topics. The fear, dogmatic religion fears queerness because we are a threat in the ways that our existence is a symbol of all the things that could make dogmatic religion lose control. Um, excuse me. There's a way that the existence of queerness forces people in a lot of ways to think outside of the box. Queer folks let everyone know not only that there is another way possible, but there are multiple ways possible, not just for queer people, but for everyone. Our existence, I believe, is an invitation to consider, who am I really? How would I like to express myself? How do I feel? How do I love? Outside of what everybody wants you to be, outside of what faith tells people that they need to be. Queerness is an invitation to imagine infinite possibility. Queerness is also a symbol of choice, a symbol of sex for pleasure. Right? It's a celebration of the feminine, where dogmatic religion seeks to squash and belittle the power of the feminine. Queerness celebrates it. Queerness is a celebration of deep feeling. It's a disruption of gender roles and norms and a disruption of the gender binary, which when a mind really, really starts to break down the gender binary, all binaries have to go with it. And when binaries start to collapse, there's more possibility for collective liberation. And when collective liberation truly exists, dogmatic religion doesn't stand a chance. Queerness is the energy of destruction for anything that wishes to remain rigid. So, because the energy of queerness naturally dismantles dogmatic religion, it poses a direct threat to the natural energy of dogmatic religion, which wants to colonize everything in its path, from nations to cultures on a large scale, on a small scale to bodies. Colonization says you cannot exist as you are, you must exist as I am or not exist at all. And queerness says, fuck that. The energy of queerness interrupts religion in the ways that people leave religion all the time because of the ways that they see their loved ones being treated, right? Whether you're queer and don't know it or straight. I've talked to countless amounts of people who have left religion after seeing other people being treated horrendously. Queerness points to holes in theology and it shines light on the immense crisis of empathy that exists in dogmatic religious communities. It forces people to choose between their bodies of what doesn't feel right to see people being treated so terribly, or between dogma. Churches also break up all the time because of religion. It's one of the leading causes of churches splitting because they cannot figure out what to do with us. I have a friend who likes to speak for the church and says, well, what about the queers? What about the queers? They just don't know what to do with us. And they fight about it and they break up. Right. And so we have to acknowledge the ways that queerness disrupts dogmatic religion. We, in my opinion, have to celebrate it, right? But we also have to somberly allow our hearts to break at the ways because of this, queerness comes, or religion, excuse me, comes back at us with a vengeance, right? They come back at us strong. They paint us as monsters. They paint us as insane, as dangerous. They spread horrific lies like saying homosexuality is the only unforgivable sin. Can you imagine? I mean, really, this supposed God who's the creator of all living beings, of earth, of water, of stars, the moons, all the galaxies, and the planets, of everything. This God is willing to forgive the many actual atrocities, such as the stealing of bodies and innocence, the wreckage of entire cultures and nations, the existence of billionaires living just blocks away from single mothers working multiple jobs in order to afford studio apartments and Captain Crunch for her 3 kids. All of this. And yet they want us to believe that God says queerness is where the line of forgivability is drawn. No, no, they're wrong. Because we are a threat to them, they kick us out of their churches and their homes. They ostracize us. They remove us from our communities and from our faith. They deny us basic human rights like medical care and marriage. And then there's also, of course, the physical violence, the homicide, and the immense amount of queer people who grew up in religion die by suicide. There are studies that show that for straight folks who are religious, religion is a protective factor for suicide. But for queer folks who are religious, suicide rates are so much higher. So much higher. The impacts of all of this, I won't go into too much detail about it. You can, I think if you're here, you probably have a good idea, right? But the impacts of all of this are truly alarming. From PTSD to mental health concerns, physical health concerns, extreme isolation, addiction, a disproportionate amount of unhoused youth. Like I said, extreme heights of suicide rates, hate crimes, and homicides. Queer folks are targets to religious dogma. And I also have to name here that religious dogma isn't just the fundamentalist churches, but religious dogma paints the air that we breathe in Western society, in the United States and all other places in the world that have been colonized by Christian thought, by Western thought. It's everywhere. It's in the air we breathe, right? There's that old, I don't know if it's a joke or whatnot, but somebody talks to the fish and says, how's the water? And the fish says, what water? Right? It's everywhere to the point where it's hard to even be able to detect it. And so how do we respond to this? I think that the role that queer folks play in the dismantling of religion must be honored and celebrated, but it must also be held with a great deal of care and concern for queer bodies who are targeted. Queer bodies need to be centered in our care, attention, protection, and advocacy. We must take care of the medicine of queerness, as this medicine benefits everybody, and the price is extremely, extremely high for queer bodies. I'm going to pause again here and again invite you to just notice your body, to notice how it is that you're digesting this information, if you are. Notice if you don't want to. as you notice whatever it is that you feel, I'd like to invite you just to practice compassion and acceptance, just for what is right now in your beautiful and wise body. So, as a somatic psychotherapist, somatic means essentially the connection between mind, body, and spirit, right? As a somatic psychotherapist, when I'm with clients, I'm not only listening to the words that they're saying, but to how their bodies are speaking or not speaking as well. I'm looking for ways that people's religious experiences have shaped them. I work a lot with queer survivors of religious trauma. I lead groups for queer survivors of religious trauma in California. And these are among them our main questions of how has religious trauma shaped your body? Because all bodies are shaped in social context. There's not a single body that has ever existed in the planet of humanity that hasn't been shaped by their social context. A lot of times, psychology likes to get really curious about how people are shaped by their families, and then it generally tends to end there. Though we are incredibly shaped by our families, we're also shaped by our broader communities, right? By the landscapes that we live in, by the spirit of the times, by social norms, by religion, by everything that's happening around us, in the air that we breathe, and the invisible forces that have so much power and control over how the world goes around. For example, a body who grew up in rural Montana is going to take a very different shape than a body that grows up in downtown Manhattan. Or maybe a body that grows up in a loving, attuned family with parents who really care about how they feel and really care about their bodies will take on a very, very different shape than a child who is raised with abusive and neglectful parents. Right? And more to the topic, a body who grew up in dogmatic religious setting where they were taught that they cannot trust their bodies, they will take on a very different shape than a body who is raised to believe in the wisdom, sacredness, and value of all bodies. Our bodies hold our stories within them, and we take on our shapes in order to adapt to our surroundings. Honestly, it's incredible to me. What we can do unconsciously to survive and to maintain connection, belonging, and dignity. Right? An example of this might be a way that a body can be shaped as I'm thinking about maybe a young queer boy who learns early on growing up in a conservative religious environment that if he moves his hips while he walks a quarter of an inch too far either direction, right, he's going to get shamed for being too feminine, for being too queer, right? He's going to learn really early on that those minute movements flag something in him that are unacceptable, right? And it'll have consequences. And so he will learn to hold his body in a more rigid ways that cues more masculinity and straightness. In a very muscular way, he will learn to bring it in, right? And when you have to do that over and over and over again, the body begins to take that shape and to hold it so that you no longer have to think about it, but it just becomes embodied. And so I'm going to return to the two questions that we're exploring today in a more direct way. I'll name them again. What does a queer body need to do in order to survive a social context of religious dogma that seeks to eradicate queerness? And what does a straight body within religious dogma need to do in order to cut off the natural flow of love towards queer bodies? The truth is, there are hundreds of answers to these questions. And for every single person who has ever had to figure this out, I think everybody has their own unique and creative ways. I want to talk today about some of the themes that I find in my work, in people I know, and in my own experience, right? If we're starting with queer bodies, one of the things that a queer body has to do, that a queer body might do, one of the things that my queer body did, is to not even be able to see vital parts of oneself, right? I didn't know I was queer until um, I had emotionally, physically, and mentally and theologically cleared the way to be able to live with it, right? I couldn't even see it in myself until I learned to accept my mother's queerness and to open up to queerness in general. My body hid the news of this queerness far away from the part of my brain that would have rather me dead than queer. I truly, truly, truly don't believe I would have survived knowing about my queerness within the social context that I lived in, right? It can be easy sometimes for me or for other people to feel shame, like, well, I didn't even know. I didn't even come out until I was insert whatever age, right? And I say, how wonderful that your body protected you from information that you were not yet able to safely integrate. Another thing that queer bodies have to do is to take on the shame of others as their own. The wisdom of shame, and I know that sounds weird to say that shame has wisdom, but it does, right? All emotions have wisdom. The wisdom of shame is it's an emotion that comes up in our bodies when we are out of bounds or when we're close to going out of bounds of the social norms and rules that could get us kicked out, right? So thinking back anthropologically to when our entire social context were just what was in front of us, right? It was just our villages, or our tribes, or our communities, right? And every single group of people has social norms, spoken or unspoken. Every single group of people has things that if you do, you will get kicked out. And getting kicked out way back when meant death. And our bodies getting kicked out still feels like death. And so when we get close to these lines where we think people aren't going to love us anymore, people might kick us out, then shame kicks in. I kind of think of it sometimes as those cars who, if you're about to go out of line, it goes beep 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 beep, beep. So you come back in, right? That's the wisdom of shame, right? And there is a way that in growing up in these religious dogmatic places where everybody is saying something is true. If you're a child, all the adults are saying homosexuality is a sin, homosexuality is an abomination, right? Then it's better, truly better for a body to believe them, to believe that they are bad, to believe that they and to hold all of the shame of the belief that they're bad. It's better to believe that than to believe that the people who they're dependent on for survival and safety are so incredibly wrong and untrustworthy. The implications of that create too much chaos in the nervous system if you can't trust the people who you have to trust for survival. So taking on the shame of others is an incredible defense of survival. Another one is dissociation, withdrawal from the body. I think that most dogmatic religions teach dissociation as holiness, that the body is a location of danger and a potential cause for one to burn in hell forever. And so it makes a lot of sense to leave the body, right? Religion, dogmatic religion asks us to seek truth outside of the body in ancient books, in an invisible God, in oftentimes a white man on a pulpit, anywhere except for here, right? Religious dogma tends to teach us to ignore our bodies, to override emotions, to shove down vital energy in order to pursue something outside of oneself. It's trained dissociation, right? And queer folks have to do it to drastic levels. However, we have time. 10 minutes, okay. Another one is hypervigilance. Internal and external hypervigilance. The internal hypervigilance of movements, gestures, tone of voice, ways of connecting with others. This can show up as extreme rule following and people pleasing. And external hypervigilance is constantly scanning for danger. And there's an inability to allow the nervous system to rest enough to store and rebalance when a body has to constantly be scanning for danger and judgment. Right? It's very taxing on the body, and it can lead to illness, disease, and extreme physical pain. Another one is working on a muscular level to squash eros and life force energy in the body. Right? One of my favorite essays of all time is Audre Lorde's The Uses of the Erotic, where she explains the erotic and eros not just as a sexual feeling, but as one's ability to feel deeply. And there's a way that we can't choose and feel what we don't want to feel, right? If we don't want to feel sadness, then we tend to not really be able to feel happiness as well, right? So many emotions are two sides of the same coin. Grief and gratitude is an incredible example of that, right? So you can't really squash down one's sexuality, one's gender expression without having to squash down one's entire life force energy. And that happens on a muscular level. And when one has to use muscles so much in order to squash that down, it can cause a lot of body pain, unexplainable body pain that doctors don't really know what to do about a lot of the time. Those are really just to name a few, right? If you're a queer body who has survived religious dogma, then you're going to have your own ways of recognizing what you had to do in your body to survive. So, what do straight bodies or non queer people have to do in order to cut off the natural flow of their bodies because of religious dogma? One of the things is that they become physically unable to see people in their wholeness. Right? Something kind of has to happen in their brain to cross circuits that aren't actually there in order to live in the amount of denial that is possible. Right? To not actually be able to see somebody right in front of them. I was speaking to one of my closest friends from Christian college who is a queer person about this talk and about these questions, and they left me a video message, and they were crying, sharing that after they came out, it took their mother 3 years to look at them, to actually look at them. Right? There was a muscular rigidity that had to happen in their mother's eyes to scan a room and to look everywhere except for where their beautiful child was. Right? That's a literal vision. But there's also so many people I know whose religious parents just constantly talk about their partners as their roommates, right? Or I still have family members who refuse to think of me as a trans man and say comments all the time that make it very obvious that they will not see me that way. Like literally, I think they forget, even though it's an important part of my identity. They often have to live in a constant state of fear and hypervigilance of queer people. There's a rigidity of expression that a body needs to take on, needing to fit into tiny boxes and not giving oneself permission to explore the many ways of being, feeling, and loving. Within this, there's a rigidity of gender norms. Men being afraid to be affectionate with one another, or to wear something that somebody might seem feminine, or to make a hand gesture or a movement that might be feminine. right? There's a structure of rigidity that the body must take the shape of. Again, dissociation from body and cutting people out. Unable to trust the love that flows from one's body. I know a number of people who have who have condemned my queerness, right? Who have hurt me in very deep ways because of my queerness. I truly believe with all of my heart that they love me and that the dogma that they have signed up with thwarts that love and makes it move into this other direction that creates all sorts of entanglements of hatred and shame. Right? They're forced to choose between continuing to love and support the people in their life or losing entire faith communities and possibly even one's faith. Right? In this, I think a lot about one of my mentors, Marlene Winnell, talks about that those who live in dogmatic religion aren't really able to be in relationship, actually related relationship with people outside of it. They're only able to treat people outside of it as objects of conversion or objects of threat, right? To either need to be able to relate to them in a way of changing them or relate to them in a way that they can hurt you and take away your faith. That takes a toll on the body. Right? So as I'm wrapping up here, I want to honor what queer bodies have had to do to survive. I want, I'm so grateful for the body's intelligence of what queer bodies have had to do to survive. And I also understand the ways of what queer bodies have had to do to survive create an enormous amount of pain and harm. This burden is immense. And I understand that the way that these waves, the things that you might have had to do to survive, are things that you probably still have to do. Because even if you left the religion, you likely still live in a social context colonized by Western religious thought. And if you're a straight person whose body had to do what it had to do in relationship with queer people in order to maintain your sense of eternal safety, heaven and hell, and connection, I want to say right now that I forgive you. And I hope that you can forgive yourself. I also want to ask you to do everything that you can do to honor and to listen to queer bodies who continue to be in danger. I want to invite you in this final moment to notice your body once again. To notice how this talk is impacting you. I invite you to feel something. I invite you to let your heart break for the ways that religious dogma has hurt everybody around queerness. I want to invite you to feel gratitude for queerness, to feel the beauty of queerness in the ways that it disrupts religious dogma. We have about 15 minutes. I want to say I welcome, Janice is going to help here, but I welcome all questions, comments, any feedback if you just want to name how you feel in your body. Okay. Thank you so much.
Oh, this was very moving. This was a great talk. We do have a question that's come in, and that they start by saying they love this talk. How do you work with clients who want to deconstruct but have ambivalence or fear about being wrong? Because the cost of being wrong, even if they recognize that it's so unlikely, is so great, such as eternal damnation. For example, I worked with someone who had an unplanned pregnancy and wanted an abortion, but had so much fear and hesitation because of the what ifs.
Mm. Yeah, it's a really beautiful question. Um, there's a lot there. There's a lot to say about it, but the first thing that comes to my mind is to really work to honor the fear, right? And to really help the person process the fear through their body, right? Every single emotion is a set of sensations that we tend to apply a lot of thoughts and judgments to. And so I work a lot with people and letting themselves feel those sensations without thinking about why those sensations are there, but to just really process the emotion and to try to get to that wisdom of fear and to really honor that that fear is there to protect that person from something that they were taught their entire life. Even if they don't think it's true anymore, it's still being protected, right? And I have found it can still take a while, but by honoring and celebrating and really feeling those emotions, that a lot of shifts and a lot of movement can happen, if nothing else, to help somebody feel more connected to the body. Wonderful question.
Yes. Okay. We have another question too. Have you ever worked with a straight person who, like me, was taught by religion that the body itself was disgusting and that any sexual sensation was wrong? I suppressed my feelings so much that I honestly believed that I did not have a libido.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I also really relate to that of not believing and having a libido. I remember as a teenager, um, having this like good Christian boyfriend and just like not wanting to have sex with him and really truly believing that the reason was because God was like preserving me for the ministry, right? But the true reason was, one, that I was queer, and two, that I had been suppressing my libido so much that when you suppress your libidos, the muscles really have to do something to constrict, and that doesn't just go away overnight, right? Um, so to answer your question, yes, I have worked with straight people around that and queer people around that. It's I would just say, like, again, it's so much about honoring what you had to do, right? I don't think it's ever useful to try to push through these incredible defenses, right? There's a really, really good reason that your body did that, right? And it was linked to survival, not just a sense of survival on Earth, but a sense of survival for all of eternity, right? Um, and so um, defenses that are about survival hold on tight, right? And they squeeze tighter if they sense you're trying to just pry them open,
Mm.
right? Like if you just like even like hold like a fist and try to pry it open, your your fist is gonna clench down more. But if you like put a hand underneath your fist to support it, then the fist tends to naturally loosen a bit.
Wow. Well, that is such a great way to put it. Someone had initially asked, because there are different ways to define queer, could you define what you mean when you say queer body?
Yes, thank you so much. That's a really great question, and I actually did mean to say what I mean when I define that, and then I just kind of found myself in the weeds. And um, so I will just say what I mean when I say queer body is really anybody who identifies as queer. I'm not really interested in like policing who is queer and who is not queer, but the umbrella of the LGBTQI um, 2S community. Um, is certainly like more so who I mean as queer. And for me, I love the term queer as just an overarching umbrella because it just includes so much possibility within
Yeah, I love that too, the inclusivity. Um, how do you avoid pathologizing not wanting to have sex or potentially being asexual or demisexual? How do you help people figure out if that's what they were taught to suppress these feelings versus if the feelings aren't there? That is such a good question.
It's really, really, really an amazing question. Um, I feel like it's a bit out of my scope in a way. I don't specialize with asexuality, and it's something I want to learn more about with the asker of this question. I oftentimes talk about um, the hunger for sex um, as a need in the same way as hunger for food, but I very much know that that's not true for all people. Um, and I think sometimes being able to tell the difference between religious trauma and being asexual can be tricky, and that there isn't always a difference. Uh, but that's a really great question, and I just have to say that's something I want to learn more about.
I really appreciate the comment that you made earlier, Mars. Just really kind of eh, validating the fact that when purity culture is like rammed on us and enforced on us, from our very tender age, it, it's not like we can just all of a sudden overnight, typically the wedding night, be like, okay, fine, no problem. I got a ring, I got a piece of paper. There can be so much time and effort required in order to unpack all of that.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
And we have another question here too. Where do you find the divine slash God slash creator after liberation from religious dogma? Like you, I was deeply entrenched in my dogmatic upbringing, which was Catholic. And after coming out, I'm grieving, in a sense, the loss of God. I know how I would answer that, and I'd love to hear how you answer.
yeah, it's a really beautiful and an important question, and the truth is that the answer to that question for me um, changes all the time, right? I think I am somebody who still has a connection to spirituality. For me, it's more of a nature-based spirituality that I feel. I live out in the redwoods, and I, I just feel a sense of divineness there. But I would say like the biggest answer for me is working with embodiment, of feeling a sense of oneness with my body. That feels. When I can really feel a positive sense of oneness with my body is when I have the strongest sense of, I don't even know what to call it, spirit or divinity, something awe, truly. Um, and I think it is a hard thing to survive, to find for survivors. There's a human named Kevin Garcia. I don't know if you are familiar with them, but they run workshops. They live in Texas and they run workshops. They're an a queer ordained minister who works to help people find spirituality after religious trauma. And I do think that there are a lot of folks out there who feel really, really passionate about the spirituality side. I feel really passionate about the body side, and I don't necessarily think those are different, but the languaging is different.
Yeah, I think the how we define different terms has a lot to do with it. Someone has asked, can we generalize that idea of queerness into an appreciation of otherness and of nuance?
Mhm. Generalization. Yeah, you can do whatever you want.
I like it. I like it. Do you offer or know of any queer affirmative trauma trainings for therapists?
I don't know of any, and I have offered some more through Marlene Winnell's channel, but it's something that I'm very open to doing. Um, so you, I'm I'm open to being contacted in order to do a training at any time.
And can you tell a little bit about the groups that you do run?
Yeah, right now I run support groups for queer survivors of religious trauma. As of now, they're only in California because they're therapy groups, though I am working on creating a coaching business so that I can run somatic coaching support groups for anybody in the world. Um, and those groups were started because I really believe that religious trauma is a group trauma and needs group spaces in order to get into certain like crevices and underbellies of the wound. Um, and also because I had the very fortunate pleasure of in my Christian school being able to come out and deconstruct with a close knit group of friends, and forever grateful for the togetherness of that. And my heart really breaks for people who have to do this alone. And so working to create community around it is something really valuable and important to me.
So when you came out, you were still a Christian?
I was still a Christian and I was on my way to being a youth pastor at a mega church. Yeah.
Right. Right. Yes. And then you were able to, as you deconstructed um, and started exploring your queerness, uh, you had a core group of friends that actually were able to stay in your life and kind of bear witness to your journey.
Yeah, well, they were also on their own journeys of realizing their queerness and their own deconstruction. It was kind of a shit show in the most beautiful way possible.
Love it. I love it. And I love how you were talking about queerness and femininity and that really being very threatening to dogmatic religion. I thought that was very interesting. Someone has said, I struggle to consider any religions not potentially traumatic. How do you navigate that?
Mhm. Well, I think that any philosophy, any idea, any religion has the potential to hold incredibly harmful components. Uh, I was talking to somebody today who got like deep into like the fundamentalist yoga world, right? I think sometimes even the queer community can has a shadow side of holding dogma
Mm.
and fundamentalism. And so I certainly agree that any group of people coming together that holds a belief or something that has a light side and a shadow side, that we all have shadow sides, and to just really, what would I say, how do I navigate that carefully, um, and really working to just continue to come back to my body and to trust my body. um, yeah.
And it's so very human for us to gravitate really strongly, extra strongly to an ideology because we're craving that certainty, security, order, and acceptance. And different ideologies promise it, and that's what we want. So I love the aspect you're talking about of actually being in our bodies. Um, Thank you so much. This has just been a great talk. Someone is saying recovering from religion. Oh, I love recovering from religion. They have a channel for people in the LGBTQ plus community looking for deconstruction. Just contact us and we can admit you to the group. I agree with Mars that healing is often best done within a community or group. Thank you, Dr. Daryl Ray, the founder of Recovering from Religion. And Dr. Ray will actually be closing out our conference tomorrow. People are saying, thank you so much. This was amazing. I feel seen. Receiving your story was extremely powerful to me, and my body had a lot to say as well. This was just a wonderful talk. Thank you for um, being genuine, being vulnerable, and sharing your wisdom with us. We really appreciated it.
Thank you so much for having me, Janice, and for everybody who's listening. Thank you so much for your time and being willing to feel this with me.
Thanks, Mars.
All right.